I never thought I'd be here, staring at the ceiling of our penthouse at 3 a.m., wondering where it all went wrong. Claire and I used to have it all, the perfect power couple, living the high life in the heart of the city. Our days were filled with board meetings and charity galas, our nights with fine dining and socializing with the creme de la creme of society. It was predictable, sure, but it was our life, our carefully crafted, meticulously planned life. But now I'm lying here alone, listening to the faint sound of traffic below, while my wife is, God knows where. It all started with that damn stable. Ava, Claire's friend, if you can call her that, suggested they take up horseback riding. I remember the day Claire came home, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Her eyes were shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her cheeks flushed as she babbled on about how they'd found this amazing stable just outside the city. Simon, you wouldn't believe it. The horses there are magnificent. Oh, it brought back so many memories, she gushed, her words tumbling out faster than I could process them. So I smiled, encouraged by her enthusiasm. It had been a while since I'd seen her this animated about anything. That's great, honey. I'm glad you had a good time. Little did I know that this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, our home transformed into some sort of equestrian shrine. Suddenly, there were horse magazines everywhere, on the coffee table, by her bedside, even in the bathroom. She'd spent hours watching videos about horse care and training techniques on a tablet. One evening I came home to find her hunched over her old sketchbook, pencil flying across the page. So I peered over her shoulder, surprised to see a beautifully detailed drawing of a horse mid-gallop. I didn't know you were still into drawing, I said, genuinely impressed. She barely looked up. Oh, I just felt inspired. Horses are such magnificent creatures, don't you think? I nodded, even though she wasn't really paying attention to me. It was nice to see her passionate about something, I told myself, even if that something wasn't me. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. Claire was spending more and more time at the stable. At first it was just a few evenings a week for riding lessons. Then it became every evening. And then the weekends too. I'd come home from work exhausted after a long day of meetings and negotiations, only to find the penthouse empty. No warm dinner waiting. No wife to greet me with a kiss. Just silence and the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air. When she did come home, she'd burst through the door in a whirlwind of energy, her hair windswept and her clothes carrying the distinct scent of hay and leather. She'd barely spare me a glance before disappearing into the shower, emerging later to curl up on the couch with her phone, giggling at messages from Ava about their stable adventures. I tried to be supportive, I really did, but every attempt to talk about her new obsession was met with vague answers or cold deflection. How was riding today? I'd ask, trying to show interest in her new hobby. Fine, she'd reply, not looking up from her phone. You've been spending a lot of time at the stable lately. Maybe we could plan a date night soon. She'd just shrug. I'm pretty busy with the lessons. Maybe next week. But next week never came. The distance between us grew, a chasm widening with each passing day. I found myself eating dinner alone more often than not, the silence of our once lively home pressing in on me from all sides. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided I'd had enough. I waited up for her, my patience wearing thin as the hours ticked by. When she finally walked in, well past midnight, I couldn't hold back anymore. So what's going on with you, Claire? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. This obsession with the stable, it's all you talk about. It's all you think about. And... She froze, her hand still on the doorknob. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard stare that I barely recognized. It's just a hobby, Simon, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Something that gives me joy. I don't need your permission for that. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, stunned, as she brushed past me and headed for the bedroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but it might as well have been a slam for how final it felt. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. This wasn't just about the horses anymore. There was something else going on, something she wasn't telling me. The Claire I knew, the woman I married, would never have spoken to me like that. As I sat there in the dark, I couldn't help but wonder, who was this cold, distant woman who had replaced my wife? And more importantly, what was she hiding? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. But one thing was clear, our perfect life was crumbling, and I had no idea how to stop it. I couldn't sleep. The city lights flickered outside our penthouse window, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to be creeping into our lives. Claire's side of the bed was cold, empty. She'd mumbled something about a late-night ride and rushed out hours ago. I paced the living room, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. The argument from earlier replayed in my mind. I tried to talk to her about the long hours at the stable, how I missed our time together. Her eyes had gone cold. Her voice clipped as she brushed me off. "You wouldn't understand, Simon. It's not just about the horses." Those words haunted me now. What didn't I understand? What was really going on? I wandered into the kitchen, opening the fridge more out of habit than hunger. A whiff of something unfamiliar caught my attention. I grabbed Claire's riding jacket from where she tossed it over a chair. The scent wasn't hay or horses, it was cologne. Musky, masculine. My stomach clenched. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in my home office, staring at the clock, waiting for the sound of her key in the lock. It was nearly 3 a.m. when she finally came home. I heard her fumbling in the dark, trying to be quiet. "Late night," I called out, flicking on a lamp. She jumped, startled. "Jesus, Simon, what are you doing up?" In the soft light, I could see the flush on her cheeks, the slightly mussed hair. Her crisp white blouse had a smudge of what looked like mud near the hem. "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How was your ride?" "Fine," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." She hurried past me, the scent of that unfamiliar cologne trailing behind her. I sat there for a long time after she'd gone, my mind racing. This wasn't just about horses anymore. I was sure of it. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and tense silences. Claire was barely home, always rushing out with vague excuses about the stable. So I threw myself into work, hoping to distract myself from the growing pit in my stomach. It was at the annual charity gala that things finally started to make sense. I nursed a scotch at the bar, scanning the crowd for Claire. She disappeared almost as soon as we'd arrived, citing some nonsense about needing to network. "You look about as thrilled to be here as I am," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Lucas, Alva's husband, settling onto the bar stool next to mine. "Lucas," I nodded, grateful for the distraction. "How are things?" He sighed, ordering a whiskey. "Honestly, not great. Ava's been distant lately. Always at that damn stable." My head snapped up. "The stable?" Lucas nodded, a frown creasing his forehead. "Yeah, she's become obsessed with riding. Spends every free moment there. I barely see her anymore." The pieces started to click into place. "Claire too," I said quietly. "She's there all the time. Comes home late, won't talk about it." Lucas's eyes met mine, a look of understanding passing between us. "You don't think," he started, then trailed off. I downed the rest of my scotch. I don't know what to think anymore, but something's not right. We spent the next hour comparing notes, our wives' strange behavior, the secrecy, the late nights. With each revelation, the knot in my stomach tightened. "We need to figure out what's going on," Lucas said finally, his voice low and determined. I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. "We should drive out there, see for ourselves what's happening at this stable." Lucas agreed, and we made plans to meet the following afternoon. As I watched him walk away to find Ava, I caught sight of Claire across the room. She was laughing, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by a group of socialites. For a moment she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with, bright, vivacious, full of life. Then her eyes met mine, and that wall came down again, cold, distant, a stranger. I left the gala early, claiming a headache. Claire barely noticed. The next day, Lucas and I met at a coffee shop far from our usual haunts. We didn't want to risk being seen by anyone who might mention it to Claire or Ava. The plan was simple: we'd drive out to the stable, scope it out, maybe even talk to some of the staff. "What if we're wrong?" Lucas asked as we slid into my car. "What if it really is just about the horses?" I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Then we'll apologize for doubting them and try to be more supportive. But if we're right..." I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Claire with someone else, of our marriage crumbling, was too painful to voice. I couldn't believe it had come to this. Lucas and I, two grown men, crouched in the shadows like a couple of teenagers on a dare. The gravel crunched under our feet as we made our way towards the stable, the cool night air doing nothing to calm my racing heart. "Do you hear that?" Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my stomach clenching. Claire's laugh, light and carefree, drifted through the air. It was a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. We approached a window, its pane cracked and letting out a sliver of warm light. I hesitated for a moment, not sure if I was ready for what I might see. But I had to know. I had to end this torment of uncertainty. Peering inside, the scene before me made my blood run cold. Claire and Ava were there, all right, but not as I'd expected. So they were half naked, their faces flushed with a manic sort of glee. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, as if sensing the bizarre energy in the room. What disturbed me most was Claire's behavior. She moved between two of the horses, her fingers trailing along their necks in slow, deliberate motions. She leaned in close, whispering something to one of the animals. The intimacy of the gesture made my skin crawl. What the hell? Lucas breathed beside me, his face a mask of confusion and disgust. I couldn't speak. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just an affair or a midlife crisis. Something was very, very wrong. So the women's laughter grew louder, taking on an unhinged quality that sent shivers down my spine. I watched in horror as their hands began to wander, reaching for places they had no business touching. That was it. I couldn't take any more. Let's go, I growled, already moving towards the door. Lucas didn't hesitate, right on my heels as we burst into the stable. The door slammed open with a bang that echoed through the building, startling the horses and causing Claire and Ava to freeze in place. For a moment, everything was still. Claire's eyes were wide with shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ava looked equally stunned, her face pale beneath her flushed cheeks. But as I scanned the room, taking in every detail of this nightmare scene, I realized something was off. There were no horses at the center of this twisted tableau. Instead, a figure stepped out of the shadows, and my blood began to boil. But Marcus, the stable's horse trainer, emerged from a darkened corner. His presence made everything click into place. The late nights, the secrecy, the obsession. It had never been about the horses. It had been about him all along. So this is what all the riding was about, I spat, my voice dripping with venom. Claire tried to speak, her lips forming words I couldn't bear to hear. I cut her off with a glare that could have frozen hell itself. Don't bother, I growled. I've seen enough. Beside me, Lucas exploded. His fury, pent up for who knows how long, erupted in a torrent of accusations directed at Ava. She shrank back, tears welling in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Marcus, the cause of our collective misery, tried to slink away, but I wasn't about to let him off that easily. You, I snarled, fixing him with a stare that stopped him in his tracks. You're done here. Pack your things and get out. If I ever see you again, I'll make sure you never work with horses in this state again. As I spoke, I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos. The betrayal captured in those images was all the evidence I needed. Claire's face, a mixture of guilt and defiance. Ava's tear-streaked cheeks, Marcus's cowardly attempt at escape. Simon, please, Claire started, reaching out towards me. I stepped back, my lip curling in disgust. Save it, Claire. We're done here. With that, I turned on my heel and strode out of the stable, leaving behind the wreckage of what I'd once thought was a perfect life. Lucas followed close behind, his anger giving way to a stunned silence. As we made our way back to the car, the cool night air did nothing to soothe the fire burning in my chest. The images of what I'd seen played on repeat in my mind, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. I climbed into the driver's seat, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. Lucas slumped into the passenger seat, his face a mask of shock and hurt. What now? He asked, his voice hollow. I started the engine, the familiar rumble doing little to calm my racing thoughts. Now? I echoed, my voice hard. Now we go home and start picking up the pieces. So we drove away from the stable, leaving behind the shattered remains of our marriages. I couldn't help but wonder how we'd gotten here. How had I missed the signs? How had Claire, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, become a stranger? The road stretched out before us, dark and uncertain. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning I woke before the sun, the sharp ticks of the clock on the nightstand the only sound filling the room. The cold weight settled in my chest, heavier than anything I'd felt before. Claire's side of the bed was empty, not unmade, just vacant like she hadn't been here in days, months, maybe years. It wasn't a bad thing, though, that she was gone. I needed her distance. Hell, at this point I craved it. I stared up at the ceiling, replaying everything from the night before, trying to pick apart the mess my life had become, but there wasn't anything to re-evaluate. The images I'd seen at the stable were seared into my brain. There was no coming back from that. No way to talk myself in or out of it. It was like someone had severed a cord inside me, and now the only thing left was to cut myself free completely. But by the time I slid out of bed, I'd already made up my mind. It wasn't some gut reaction. This wasn't me acting out of anger or heartbreak. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee in the quiet. Each step I took towards stripping Claire out of my life felt like I was moving one step out of the fog. I didn't allow myself to wallow. Didn't even flinch when I picked up my phone, thumb scrolling to Tom's number. Out of everyone, Tom was the person I needed now. Cold, efficient, and heartless when it came to divorce. Perfect for a situation like this. It didn't take long for the call to connect. Tom's voice came through dry and even, same tone I'd heard before when he was advising another colleague going through a messy split. No pleasantries needed. "Hey, I need to start divorce proceedings," I said, my voice calm. More measured than it had any right to be. The words passed out before I could second-guess them, and there was no regret behind them either. No remorse. What hit me more than anything was sheer exhaustion from how much time I'd wasted here. The moment I explained the situation, I could picture Tom's mind already spinning through the legalities, the calculations. He cut straight to the chase, asking me for immediate financial details. I knew this would happen smoothly. I wanted Claire out of my life, but I wouldn't let her ransack me on her way out. There was no chance I'd allow her to leave this marriage with a dime more than she'd come in with. Not after what I'd seen yesterday. The conversations, the whispers she dismissed as insecurity on my part, rushed back at me like an avalanche. It wasn't insecurity. It was real, and now there was proof. "She doesn't get a penny beyond what's hers," I said. Voice leveled, my fingers tapping rhythmically against the kitchen countertop. Tom agreed without hesitation. No need for drawn-out explanations, efficiency, that's why I hired him. He asked about the accounts, the property, the things tied between us. Easily fixed. By the time I hung up, I'd severed every financial tie I could. Joint accounts closed. Investments shifted. I wasn't about to leave her a path to bleed me dry. Afterward, I poured myself a second cup of coffee. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of sheer need to do something. The silence in that moment was deafening. That house used to be loud, laughter, conversations when life still felt normal, still felt possible. I barely registered the passing of time before Lucas arrived, both of us silently standing by each other's side in the aftermath of betrayal. Nothing much needed to be said. He was in the same boat, going through the same storm. The craziest thing wasn't even the cheating. It was the fallout. The two women threw themselves onto the knives that they'd been sharpening for years. Physical attraction, excitement, thrill, it could all be written off in the beginning, blamed on some midlife crisis bullshit. But to risk it all for Marcus. It wasn't like Claire, and Ava had an exit plan after blowing everything up with those little stables trysts. They destroyed a damn palace for a field shack. Lucas and I stood there, knowing we were the collateral. And the social blowback, that was almost comical, really. So I expected the usual whispers, the awkward clinks of champagne flutes at parties that would be heard in their absences. But the truth was, people in our circles, they chose sides quicker than horses out of the gate. Claire and Ava, in all their diamonds and designer dresses, became paras almost overnight. Wasn't long before invitations to parties dried up, disappearing males left, right, center. To the same friends they toasted with at charity galas were now treating them like lepers. The scandal of it all, of course, infidelities don't sit too well with those maintaining perfect little facades. I guess Ava was seeing the hits too, from what Lucas told me how bitter she'd grown about it all. We could have felt pity, but there was none left. For a while, Lucas and I sat quietly, just thinking, staring into our empty drinks. And then, of course, my phone buzzed on the table. Claire. I didn't have to open the message to guess the contents, but I did. "Simon, we need to talk, please. It's not what you think. I can explain." I showed it to Lucas. His response was immediate. Scoffed, blunt. Exactly what I knew he'd think. "Explain what?" His voice came out with that mix of derision and anger I had threaded through my mind non-stop since last night. There was nothing, that would make this better. No amount of confessing or backpedaling could reverse what I'd seen. Claire had dug her grave, and now she was squirming before even falling into it. Classic. I didn't even feel like responding. Her words, unconvincing and hollow, didn't deserve a response. I deleted the message. Simple. She'd hear from the lawyers soon enough, and that's when she'd have a chance to explain or cry or whatever the hell she felt. But me? I was done reading into those fake-sounding tears or caring about her endless deflections. I knew where I stood finally. Lucas nodded when I tossed the phone down. There was a solidarity between us that ran deeper at that moment. Both exiled to the same emotional wasteland, but we weren't out here searching for a map back. We were just ready to rebuild on the ashes. By evening, I was back home, sitting quietly in the study, while outside the city lights flickered under a deep blue sky. The dark irony hadn't escaped me. Despite the hundreds of times we'd hosted people in this house, all the noise and chatter and so-called life of the upper echelon, this place had never felt as quiet as it did now. It wasn't mourning the loss of Claire so much as what she represented, the partnership I'd believed in, the trust I'd invested in this home, in us. But now the weight of her absence felt more like lifting a suffocating blanket than anything else. Room by room, I conquered little ghosts hiding in corners, feeling the presence of her slowly, but surely, evaporate into nothing. I had scotch in my hand, one finger's worth, and the distant hum of the city to keep me company. This was the final stretch. I told myself I didn't have to think too far ahead. Between Tom's work and the social nosedive Claire had already taken, things were coming to a slow, inevitable conclusion. And once she'd signed her name on that last sheet of paper, she was out. Out of my house. Out of my life. For so long I'd been trapped thinking about what we were going to be, how to repair us, forcing us into every equation. Tonight, it wasn't about us. It was just me. Through Claire's lies, whatever thin veneer she constructed around our marriage finally crumbled, and what was left was the truth neither of us could argue anymore. I saw the end of it clearer than ever, the freedom I hadn't known I'd missed until recently. I stood at the window, looking out at the skyline, the buzz of the city feeling distant, unreal, compared to everything that happened over the last 48 hours. As hard as it was, there was a relief creeping into every breath I took. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.